She's been dead 3 hours now. Sitting with my laptop, huddled in the corner of my flat, I still can't believe I'm writing this. It doesn't seem real. None of it seems real. A week ago we were on holiday together, and now I have to get this down. That's the main thing. I need to get it down, or no one will believe me. Damn, I'm not even sure I believe me. Although I can still see it when I shut my eyes. A part of my brain is already working to convince the rest of me it was just a dream, just some awful half-delirious nightmare brought on by the stress of my girlfriend's illness. It isn't though. I know it isn't. And if I don't make a record of this now, I think something in my head is going to snap. Poppy started finding the hairs the day after we got back. We'd been on holiday to Myanmar, our first big trip together. Poppy and I have been going out 3 years, and we finally moved in together last summer. We'd been planning that trip ever since. Looking back now, it feels like the holiday happened to someone else, to some other couple. We visited the temples of Bagan, saw the lights in Yangon, even went skinny dipping after a few cocktails. Trekking was my favorite thing. We went on a handful of group hikes through the villages and the countryside, following a guide through fields of chili and ginger. We slept under the stars. It was the happiest I've been in years, but the day after we got back, things changed. That was when Poppy began finding the hairs. They were in her mouth when she woke up. I still remember the first morning she told me. It was the day we were both due back at work, and I found her standing in our bathroom by the sink, frozen in front of the mirror. She didn't glance up to acknowledge me. "Aren't you getting dressed?" I asked. "We're going to miss the train if we don't leave in 10, sweetheart." Poppy blinked. Her eyes found mine in the mirror. She had a slight frown on her face, and I thought at first she hadn't heard me. Then she held out her hand with the palm facing up. "So weird," she muttered. 3 white hairs lay across it. They were short, maybe an inch long, slightly crinkled. My parents have a white Jack Russell cross, and they reminded me a bit of the hairs she sometimes left on my coat when I went to visit. "What's that? Are you molting?" I meant it as a joke, but Poppy didn't laugh. Her eyes flicked from mine to the hairs in her hand, and then back to mine again. She pulled a face. "This is going to sound super gross, but, well, I don't even get how it happened." She turned back to face the mirror. "I found them in my mouth. I could feel something tickling me when I woke up. So damn gross. It was like that feeling when you get a hair in a mouthful of food. Where do you think they came from?" I glanced at my watch. "I don't know. Probably off that light grey jumper of yours or something. Who knows? We better make a move anyway." Poppy leaned forward and then turned on the tap, held her hand under it and watched the hairs wash off her skin and run down the plug hole. Her next words were half mumbled, and I almost missed them beneath the sound of the water. "That jumper's shoved in a cupboard somewhere. I haven't worn it in years," she said. As I write this now, a big part of me hates myself. I hate myself for not taking it more seriously. The whole thing happened fast once it started. It's true, and I don't even know if I'd been able to stop it anyway. But I could have tried. I could have rushed her to the doctor early on. If not after that first morning, then at least after she'd been showing some other symptoms. The next day it was stomach aches. Poppy didn't mention the hairs to me again, not that morning at least. But when I went to wake her for work, she told me she wasn't going in. She had sharp pains in her belly, she said. She'd been getting them all night, barely slept. I kissed her forehead and told her to get plenty of rest, said it was probably the chicken she'd eaten last night, or one of those 24-hour bugs. Told her to get some sleep, and it would get better. It didn't get better. When I returned home from work 9 hours later, eyes stinging and tired, Poppy was still in bed. She moaned a half-greeting when I came into the room, but didn't open her eyes. I woke the next day to see Poppy sat up in bed beside me. Her eyes were half-lidded with sleep. "I don't get this." Her voice sounded weak and gravelly. She stared down at her hands, which were cupped in front of her, her forehead creased in a frown. "More of those damn hairs, the same white ones again." She turned to me as I sat up in bed, and for the first time I saw something more than confusion on her face. Something approaching fear. I started to mumble some response, but then she cut me off. "I had them yesterday too. I remember half waking when your alarm went off, and feeling them there. 3 small hairs on my tongue and 1 between my back teeth. She shuddered. It doesn't make any sense. Before I had a chance to say anything, she groaned, screwed her eyes shut and clutched her hands around her belly. I put my hand on her and waited for the pain to pass. After a few seconds had gone by, she straightened again and turned to look at me. No better? The question seemed stupid, obvious, but it was all I could think to say. Poppy frowned. I felt like I slept a bit better last night, but when I woke up this morning, the pain was back. It comes in waves, but it's still there. Before I left for work, we agreed that she'd book a doctor's appointment. Later, sat at my desk as the afternoon stretched on and the minutes dragged, I did some Googling. Symptoms, the NHS website, WebMD, none of it helped. There were too many possibilities ranging from mild stomach bugs to things I didn't even want to consider. And when I added in the white hairs, nothing came up at all. The thing at the back of my mind, the thing I didn't want to pay too much attention to, even though I knew I couldn't ignore it, was the holiday. Our trip to Myanmar. Because you heard stories, right? Travelers who come back home with weird tropical illnesses. People who ignored a tiny bite or a sting only for it to turn into something far worse. I'd even had a similar conversation with the guide on one of our treks. Kin, his name had been. We'd got talking one night while he smoked a cigarette. The conversation had started with his job, then moved on to tourism in the area, to some of the stupid things he'd seen people do. Some people, they don't have any sense of respect, Kin had said. They do not understand that they are guests in someone else's home, or that the area they're in can be dangerous. They want to pet stray dogs. They want to take photos of snakes. I laugh quietly. We always get these people, all the time. My friends are seeing this. They take stupid risks, go up to wild animals, swim in lakes they shouldn't swim in, walk in places they shouldn't walk. My mind suddenly flashed back to mine and Poppy's skinny dipping session, and a pang of guilt went through me. I didn't say anything. All the time, and they don't know the dangers, Kin continued. Hidden dangers. You can get bitten by something. Maybe a wild dog. Rabies. Poisonous snakes. Spiders that lay eggs in a cut. Parasites in the water. My country. It needs the tourism, but it is, how do you say in England, like a sword with 2 edges. Good and bad. He paused and took another drag on the cigarette. Some people, they don't respect the land. They don't understand that there are old places here, old things that have been here long before them and should not be disturbed. Poppy was worse when I got home that day, quite a lot worse. She barely spoke and wouldn't eat the soup I made her. She had this smell on her breath that was sort of spoiled, like meat that's been left out on the side for too long. The only thing I got out of her was that she'd booked a doctor's appointment for the following afternoon, and I have to admit that made me feel a bit better at the time. When I eventually joined her in bed a few hours later, she was fast asleep. Something woke me in the night. A noise, sort of a half-heard rustling that blended with the dream I was having. I struggled up from sleep like a swimmer dragging themselves to the surface of the water. The room was dark, and at first I couldn't get my bearings. I could still hear the scrabbling noise I'd heard in my dream, and it took my mind a moment to realize I was awake. A soft rustling. It sounded close. One of the old houses I lived in as a student once had a rat infestation, and that was the first place my mind went. Little scurrying feet in the walls, maybe, or under the floor. That was wrong though, and I knew it was wrong. The noise was soft, but it wasn't behind the walls. It was closer than that. Then, the noise stopped. I stared into the darkness, ears pricked, but I couldn't hear anything. The room was silent. Then I saw a hint of movement from the corner of my eye in Poppy's direction. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Her head was the wrong shape. Staring at her silhouette, that was the first thought to shoot across my mind. She looked wrong. I could only make out her outline in the room's thick darkness, but the shape of her head was lumpy. Like an extra jut of bone was sprouting from the place her mouth should be. I closed my eyes, hard, trying to force the sleep out of them, and 2 things happened at once. Poppy's dark shape shifted in the bed, and a whining noise, a soft high-pitched keening issued from her side of the bed. Then it broke off as Poppy spluttered, pulling in little hitching half-breaths, and coughed some more. I held my breath. I suddenly had the horrible idea that she might be choking in her sleep, her throat clogged with a mixture of phlegm and those tiny white hairs she kept pulling out from her mouth. But after a few more seconds, the coughing petered out. I lay frozen in the bed, fully awake now, listening, straining my ears for those soft rustling sounds. But the only noise I could hear was Poppy's breathing. That was last night. It feels like it happened years ago, but there it is. Less than 24 hours, less than one full day for my life to be ripped apart. I need to write this next bit fast now. I have to get it down. If I think too much about it or hesitate, I know I'll lose my nerve. I left for work as usual this morning. Just that sentence alone makes me feel sick with guilt. But it's true. I didn't ring the hospital or drive Poppy to the emergency room like I now know I should have done. I just got dressed and walked out the door like it was another day. I could tell you it was Poppy's doctor's appointment, which I knew it was coming up, or the fact that she was fast asleep when I kissed her goodbye. But neither of those things make me feel better. I think a big part of me knew something was wrong even then, seriously wrong. But the rest of me didn't want to admit it. The feeling didn't go away though. As the hours ticked by at work, I didn't hear anything from Poppy. It grew. I told myself she'd be sleeping. And then I told myself she'd be busy at her appointment. But it didn't help. By the time 5 o'clock hit and I finally left the office, I was practically running. I knew something was wrong as soon as I got to our front door. Before then, actually, I could hear Poppy's ragged coughs echoing down the hall as I reached the corridor outside our flat. They were worse than they'd been the night before. Those coughs, much worse. I didn't know if it was the acoustics of the hall distorting them, but to me they barely sounded human. I fumbled my key into the lock and burst through the front door, staggered along the hall to the source of the sound, the bathroom. Poppy was on her knees in front of the toilet, hands clutching the porcelain, her hair on her face as she coughed over and over again. Then she turned to me, half turned towards the sound of my voice, and as soon as I got a glimpse of her face, my words died on my tongue. Poppy's skin beading with sweat, the tendons on her neck stood out like ropes, strands of hair stuck to her forehead, framing and half obscuring her bloodshot eyes. Her exhausted gaze forever burnt into my mind. Poppy opened her mouth and I stared on in horror as a runnel of blood spilled from the corner of it. A low moan issued from deep in her throat, a sound filled with pain and panic. Then she collapsed. Her hands slipped from the toilet and she crashed sideways onto the tiles. Poppy's whole body jerked and shook, her face turned towards me, mouth open, and that's when I saw it. Something in the dark cave of her throat. It was moving. Some horrible thing was writhing and twisting in there. I will never ever get the image of what I saw in Poppy's mouth out of my mind. Not ever. I can see it now, clearly. When I shut my eyes, a nightmare reel of images that are going to play and play and play, like a horror film stuck on loop. It was about the same size as a rat, but that's where the similarities ended. This thing didn't have feet. It had legs, horrible legs, more akin to a crab than a rodent. They writhed and scrabbled for purchase. All of that was terrible, but it wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was the creature's face. It was sort of a crumpled-in, crushed pulp of flesh that looked like a disgusting tumor. A tumor with 3 unblinking, shiny, black eyes. The creature whined. It was a high-pitched, mewling sound that made the skin of my neck itch. The thing's nest of legs scrabbled for purchase on the bathroom floor, finally dragging its rodent-like body free of her mouth. Have you ever seen a cockroach move? They don't look like they should be fast, but they are. This thing scurried straight past me. My body convulsed back in reflex as it did so. It then scaled the curtains in a white bloody blur, and then it was gone, through the half-open window and into the night. I don't remember calling the ambulance. I must have done it though, because at some point I remember a paramedic taking my arm. I was sat with Poppy at the time, talking to her while I stroked her hair, and I didn't hear them come in. I think I already knew she was dead by then. She hadn't moved in a long time, and her skin felt cold. I don't remember much of what happened next, but I remember one of the paramedics leading me into our lounge and sitting me on the sofa, talking to me. I guess I talked back, but I can't remember what I said. The only thing I do remember was insisting that I wasn't going to come with them when they left. I said I'd follow on later, even though I didn't even know where they were going. For a long time after they're gone, before I started writing all this, I just sat staring into space, thinking about what I should have done and didn't do. Thinking about that thing growing in Poppy's stomach. Thinking about the conversation I had with Kin, what seems like a lifetime ago, when he told me about the old things of this world, things that shouldn't be disturbed. I need to go soon. I need to make calls, tell people about Poppy, follow the paramedics. I'm not sure I can though, that's the thing. I'm not sure I can leave this flat. A big part of me wants to walk out the door and never come back here again. But another part, quite a large part actually, keeps thinking about the darkness outside the window. That same darkness the white thing disappeared into. The white, scuttling creature that even now must be out there somewhere. Maybe lurking in the sewers, or squeezed into some dark crack in a wall, waiting.